Part 2 has gotten a lot of mixed reception from the public so far, and now that the first arc of Part 2 is over, I'd like to give my 2 cents and do a full review of Part 2. Let's start with the main quartet. Dreamseeker is my favorite because she's the most developed so far. Her time travel power is really fascinating, so I'm wondering how that's going to play out in future chapters. And she also has a likable, headstrong personality. Her story is clearly going to dive into some existentialism in the next arc, and she's starting to suffer, which is nice. Senadina is my second favorite. She's like a smart Kiana. She's happy-go-lucky, airheaded, and has her dumb moments, but she also picks up on some things quicker than everybody else, shockingly. Coralie is good. Not great, just good. She's really funny, but I feel like sometimes she's reduced to an exposition vomiter, and she hasn't done anything truly amazing to grab my attention just yet. She's far from useless, but she doesn't stand out. Speaking of useless, Helia is one of the characters of all time. Apart from her saying clout that one time, or her opening up about feeling inferior, which was brought up in a side story and was never brought up again, by the way, there is nothing about her that is remotely compelling. She's just there. That inferiority thing can be expanded upon. I think it goes without saying that she desperately needs a character arc, because right now, the only thing consistently interesting about her is her body and hair vents, according to Reddit. And if you're angry that she's reduced to her physical attributes, I tried, guys. I really tried, but this woman is as interesting as white bread. Don't hate the YouTuber, hate the game. As for when they were all together, they don't really seem like friends. I don't really get that vibe at all. They seem like people who were forced together in a group project by the teacher, and you're working together in order to get it done, but you know when it's done that you'll never talk to each other again, speaking from experience. In my opinion, they work better in pairs right now. Senadina and Dreamseeker are the obvious pair. They formed a covenant with each other in the beginning. Dreamseeker is clearly distraught when no one remembers Senna, and sometimes even prioritizes her. As for Coralie and Helia, they are the two Earthlings that won the Mars exploration trials. Their banter is cute, and I actually do like Helia when she's with Coralie. There is also a possibility that the reason Coralie brings up Helia's A-rank status so much is because she knows about Helia's inferiority and is trying to cheer her up by boasting about it to people, indirectly telling Helia that becoming an A-rank Valkyrie is a great achievement and is something to be proud of. If that's true, then that's adorable and I love it. All of this to say, they work well in pairs right now, not together, and I hope in the next arcs they build the main cast individually as well as a team. Have Dreamseeker have a heart-to-heart with either Coralie or Helia, something that makes them feel like actual friends. With my biggest point out of the way, let's talk about the Seven Shus. Unpopular opinion, I think Sanchi's kind of mid. She's a goofy idiot that brightens up people's days just by being around her, and also really commendable for knowing that she was going to get murdered but still being happy. But that's all I can say. Her whole shtick was being a mundane, boring, and ordinary person, and that's exactly who she is. She's boring. There's nothing to her that really sticks out to me. I don't really get the hype around her. I know she's relatable to a lot of people, and she even got relatable for me at some times. I'm not here to judge you for liking her. If you like her, that's awesome. She just wasn't doing it for me personally. I give her a 6 out of 10, minus 4 points for no cannibalism. Moving on to Savore, and oh my gosh, I'm just falling more and more in love with her every chapter. She's in my top 3 favorite Shus. Her horrific past with her parents is super dark and depressing, and she's actually the first part 2 character to make me cry because of that, and the fact that Sanchi she lifted her spirits with something as simple as candy. Especially knowing that if we didn't defeat the Shadow Calamity, she would be destined to fight until her body exhausts itself and she dies. Ever since she got this power, she's been killing herself slowly by constantly fighting and never letting up. Savorei is just a depressing character all around. So as for the classic depression and dark part of Honkai that we all know and love, she's definitely my favorite in that regard. Baiji and Ajita are my other two favorites, if you couldn't tell. They were on my radar since chapter 1 because they seemed more important than the rest. Ajita has only shown up 3 times in this entire arc, which is incredibly suspicious. There are massive implications that she is going to be the next Siren Otto Kevin, aka the next big overarching villain for the series, and that is very exciting. She makes a great mysterious villain so far. As for Baiji, he's the leader of this whole thing, which naturally casts interest. Even after finishing the arc, I still had so many questions about him that were left unanswered. His involvement with Ajita is fascinating to say the least. I made a whole theory about it, check it out. Even if my theory isn't right, you have to admit, Ajita and Baiji being partners before the Seven Shus became a thing raises so many questions. They are definitely my favorite in terms of the mystery of part 2. A great mystery is being built with these two, and I cannot wait to see where it goes. I have less thoughts on the other 3, so speed round. Serapeum's story was short and sweet, the hive mind cult was really cool and creepy at times, and it didn't overstay its welcome, which is perfect. Thelema was a character I didn't really like to begin with. I guess hair events are the staple of boring nothing characters, but later events brought the creepiest moment in the arc for me. I do like her relationship with Serapeum and Sanchi, so I do see great potential for her in the future. As for Litost, he got ripped off, okay? If chapter 1 wasn't as bad as it was, he wouldn't be in the situation he is now. I said it before and I'll say it again. He's the Wendy of part 2 and you do not want to be in that situation. I genuinely hope chapter 4 can give him the screen time he deserves. Actually, he does want to be forgotten, so I can't review this arc without going over the individual chapters themselves, so let's go. I can tell the devs wanted part 2 to start with a big bang, and they failed on all accounts. Chapter 1 is a bit of a mess. It is not accustomed to new players at all like they said it would be, the writing's confusing, and they choose the least exciting way to tell its story. The most infamous example of this is the Pool of Shadows / Litost section. As I said, I like Litost. He's very strange, but that adds to his intrigue and it was a little fun to try and figure him out. But I would be lying if I said there wasn't another more interesting way they could tell his story. What I think they should have done was put us in Litost's perspective during these memory sections. I don't think it would make it much more exciting, but it would be more exciting than just being a third party, watching it, and then discussing it at length with a group. There are more examples of this, but I'll spare you the details. The pacing is a little slow this entire arc, but chapter 1 is the most egregious example of it. Chapter 1 was just a rough start all around, and really hurt part 2's reputation. Chapter 2 is a little bit better. It's still slow at some parts, but I loved Serapeum's story. Like I said, short but sweet, and the hive mind stuff was awesome. Thelema's part was the exact opposite though. It was like Litost's section but worse since there's a lot more memories, and to be honest, you could just skip some of them. At least each memory of Litost's was important and told you a lot more about his character. A lot of her memories just told you nothing, and self-awareness does not make it okay, game, so quit with that. that. Chapter 3 is where part 2 starts to get good. The twist with Perception was the greatest part, and it made me rethink everything she said in the past, which was a glorious thing to experience. The boss fight was the best out of the 3. It was just really good all around. Chapter 3 EX was good. It wasn't great. It was a little boring at the beginning, as the characters spend almost 2 hours crying over Sanchi, but it finally gets good at the end of Act 1, where the twist hits you like a truck. Let's talk about the twist for a minute, because people seem to have 2 very opposing opinions on it. It either makes the story more interesting, or it ruins the story completely and puts part 2 in the grave. I am of the opinion that it makes the story more interesting, and here's why. I totally get where the other side is coming from, because this is heavily reminiscent of all those endings. Nothing was real, it was all a dream, or a video game, or a TV show, and every other variation, and those endings are notoriously bad. But there is a big difference between those twists and this one. I'll use Danganronpa V3 as an example for this. The twist for this game was that everything was a TV show, and that ruined everything because it negates every piece of lore by saying this horrible stuff happening was something that we made up, and the real world outside of this show is actually perfectly fine and nothing was wrong. That's what they do in most of these twists.
What is the point of this game? Oh my god, earthquake happens. Your friends are being tortured. You should go and save them. But you're just in a game. That's stupid. You had a good thing going for you, game. That's a cop-out ending. That's so bad.
In Honkai, while Oxia and Link 2 is just a simulation inside a computer, the real world isn't all hunky-dory. Kiana has fallen into a coma and can't wake up. Mei and Bronya enlist us to get to the bottom of it by using the simulation. This gives us a reason to be in the simulation and adds to this story. Oxia and Link 2 do matter. Not to mention Dreamseeker, a person built into the simulation made out of data, can go into the real world and talk with people, which adds a third layer of complexity, which is the existentialism I was talking about earlier. Who is she? Why is this happening? Why was Dreamseeker built into this quantum computer? Also, there might be others like her that we don't know about yet that I theorized in my video. So I think the twist adds multiple layers of complexity to the story, which makes it better. I give this arc a B tier. It's not an A tier or S tier because it makes too many mistakes in the first half, but the second half saves it from a C, D, or F. It would have been an A if cannibalism was involved, but what are you gonna do? Now that I got all of the general thoughts out of the way, I want to talk about some little things that I liked or didn't like. Starting with these anecdotes, I actually really like the anecdotes. They give us more lore on different characters and made me a lot more interested in the Seven Shus than I would have been if I hadn't read them. That being said, some of these anecdotes are way too good to just be anecdotes. Not everyone reads the anecdotes, and that's a bummer. I'm mostly talking about Savore's when I say this, but there are other good ones. How many of you learned about Savore's past through the anecdotes in-game and not from videos like mine or someone else's? I genuinely want to know. I wanted them to bring up her past in the main story so badly. It would have made the arc better and perhaps be an unforgettable moment because, as I mentioned, her past is the good old Honkai depression that we all wanted. Moving on to something I don't like. I think they severely underused the 10 Faces of Misery. Dreamseeker being infected by one of them was one of the only interesting things about Chapter 1, and there was massive potential in the rest. Tainted by Dust is an infection that makes the person distrust and scared of everyone around them, and eventually themselves. Faded Lights are incurable diseases, and there's 6 more that we have no idea about. The next arc takes place in Oxia and Link 2 as well, so there may be potential potential for the shadows to return, but in terms of this arc, I'm disappointed with how little they were used. I like that there were boss fights every chapter instead of at the end of every arc like part 1 in 1.5. I'm not sure if this was some special thing that they did because this is the first arc of part 2, but judging by the 7.7 lounge, the boss fights every chapter are here to stay, and that's amazing. Since chapter 35, the boss fights have been nothing but peak. They're my favorite things in the game next to the animation, so more of them are more than welcome. I like the enemy variation. I realize that's a very little thing, but it's really appreciated. The enemies in part 1 were varied, but only a little bit. New types were added every now and then, but they were mostly the same 3 to 5 monsters for each type. In part 2 so far, every update excluding 7.6 has added 2 new creatures, and I just love that because it kind of brought some excitement to the game, to me at least. I also enjoyed the puzzle variation. The puzzles are still very easy and barely require any thought. Apart from this one, this is pretty hard for me. The amount of puzzles though say that Hoyoverse is trying to implement more gameplay into the open world. It's not perfect, but I see their efforts and I support it. The same could be said for the other 2 points I just made. They didn't have to do those, but they did, and all these little things add up just to make it a little bit of a better experience for me. That shows care for the game. It would have been a better experience if someone was a cannibal, gosh dang it. Although part 2 started off pretty rough, I feel like the writers are finding their footing with it fairly quickly, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what's next. Part 2 has great potential in my opinion, and I hope they don't waste it. I've been on a little break from content creation after my hour-long endeavor, but I'm back just in time for chapter 4 to release in a few weeks. So look out for that video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, consider subscribing for more videos like this one, and I will see you next time.